You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, your host and White House correspondent in LA, joining you live in afternoon drive time. You are listening to A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580, and I'm delighted to be with you and to have you with me. Listen, I'm in touch until you be in touch. Follow me on all the social media platforms at Dr. Nii-Quartelai. All you got to do is type in Dr. Nii-Q, D-R-N-I-I-Q, and I pop right on up fresh for you to follow. Also, be sure to download the KBLA app to listen to us live or on demand, or simply tell Alexa to play KBLA Talk 1580, and there we are for your listening pleasure. Last but not least, subscribe to A More Perfect Union podcast. That way you'll never miss an episode. Now, we have a call to action for you. Of course, Washington, D.C. is on the minds of so many of us, and rightfully so. What is happening in Washington, D.C. is also happening to all of us. That is our nation's capital. And what is happening there should concern us. I want to remind folks to tap in to the DC Community Organizing Festival. It's taking place Saturday, September 6th from 12 to 4 p.m. at the University of the District of Columbia. Coalition organizations like Black Swan Academy, DC Action, DC Vote, Fair Budget Coalition, Free DC, and so many more have come together to develop this community organizing festival. There will be free food, free entry for all ages. You can go to risingorganizers.org. That's risingorganizers.org to RSVP to participate in this event. We know that this is a moment for folks to come together, and to fight for our shared values, our shared futures. And we know that we're all stronger when we're not working alone. And that's why this festival is your chance to build relationships with people who share your vision for a just and democratic DC, learn some practical skills and hands-on training, and also discover some local campaigns and organizations that you can plug into right away. And so, again, mark your calendars for September 6th for the DC Community Organizing Festival at the University of the District of Columbia. We are proud to amplify this work that's afoot. Now it's time for your national news roundup. It's time for you to decide the good, bad, and ugly headlines of the day. We broke this news yesterday when we were on air. And today we're learning that Trump says that he's removing Fed Governor Lisa Cook, citing his administration's allegations of mortgage fraud. That's what he says he's doing. But Lisa Cook, she is not fading into the darkness. In fact, she is doing the opposite. She said, I ain't going. That's what she said. She said, I ain't going. And we are proud to see it. She's standing up for herself. And that's a good thing. This is what we know right now. Lisa Cook's lawyer, Abby Lowell, said that they would sue over Trump's efforts to remove Cook as a governor of the Federal Reserve. Trump said last night that he was doing so, citing an accusation of potential mortgage fraud, an accusation that Lisa Cook denies. And so let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this accusation of mortgage fraud, because I feel like we've heard this somewhere before. In fact, NBC News is reporting that in recent weeks, President Trump has levied this mortgage fraud allegation against not one, not two, but three Democratic officials. The latest came Wednesday, when Trump, who's been sharply critical of the Federal Reserve's interest rate policies, said on a Truth Social platform that Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook must resign now. His post came after William Pulte, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, alleged, keyword, he alleged in a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi that Cook, who was nominated by President Biden, quotes, falsified bank documents and property records to acquire more favorable loan terms, potentially committing mortgage fraud. Pulte's letter claimed that Cook falsified her resident status for her properties in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Atlanta. Now, the move followed recent efforts targeting Senator Adam Schiff of California, who was a leading figure in Trump's impeachment. Y'all remember that? And then, what about New York Attorney General Letitia James, who successfully sued Trump and his company over what her office said were fraudulent misrepresentations of his wealth and financial statements that he used to get favorable rates on bank loans and insurance policies that he otherwise would not have been able to obtain. You see, a judge awarded James's office over $300 million in that case, an amount that has since ballooned to over $500 million with interest. Now, Trump has called the case, quote, a fraud on me, and is appealing the judgment. On Thursday, an appeals court threw out that judgment. And so, make no mistake about it, making an allegation of mortgage fraud, it's long been a common tactic in opposition research on political campaigns. In fact, a Republican campaign veteran told sources that searching for inconsistencies in where candidates declare their primary residence is among the first tasks of opposition researchers. It's an issue relevant to elected officials who split their time between their home states and Washington. And this person said it is a frequent issue in campaigns on both sides, and the penalty tends to be a fine, not jail time. You also might remember last year, Senator Angela Alsobrook of Maryland, then a candidate for office, faced a $47,000 bill in Washington, D.C. after it was discovered that she wrongly received property tax credits that she improperly claimed on a home she had rented out. And so, how many people think this is just a case of a political opponent looking for a vulnerability and maybe finding one, versus this is just Trump doing what Trump wants to do when he wants to do it? Either way you cut it, Lisa Cook said, I ain't going nowhere. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on this. Finally, the New York Times is reporting that a judge rules that Utah must redraw its congressional maps, frustrating Republicans. That's right. A judge in Utah ruled that lawmakers must urgently redraw the state's congressional map, saying that Republican-controlled state assembly, it ignored voter-approved safeguards against gerrymandering when it carved up a Democratic stronghold into not one, not two, not three, but 4 GOP majority districts. The current map adopted in 2021 divided a district that had encompassed Salt Lake City, the biggest city and an island of Democratic support, in an otherwise almost entirely red state. Republican lawmakers, they approved a map that split the area into 4 districts that each had a Republican majority. No Democrat has won a U.S. House seat in Utah since 2018. When we come forward, we're switching gears. I'm looking forward to welcoming a D.C. native. He is Ryan L. Jones, Esquire. He is a former candidate for D.C. Attorney General, former Associate Attorney General of D.C., and he has a lot to say about what's afoot in his hometown, our nation's capital. Ryan Jones, joins us when we come forward. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, and really delighted to welcome back to the show my friend, our friend, Ryan L. Jones. He's a DC-based attorney. He's also the former associate DC Attorney General. And Washington, D.C. Isn't just where he has built a storied career representing clients, but it's also a place he calls home. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you, Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte. I really appreciate it.
Well, listen, first things first, I just want to check in with you on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
This is your hometown.
Mm-hmm.
How are you processing what has taken place in your hometown of Washington, D.C. over the course of the past couple weeks? Certainly in our lifetime, we have never seen a federal takeover like the one that we have seen these past couple weeks. How are you processing that?
So you see the images, the videos, and I've actually come out of a restaurant and seen ATF, DEA agents, maybe National Guard. You just can't tell with the military uniform, as well as DC Police, MPD, surrounding a vehicle. So when you see it in person versus seeing the videos and seeing the affected parties, it hits you differently. To know and really appreciate that what this administration is trying to do, and from the inception, you didn't believe it was coming, and now it's here, and everyone's kind of caught flat-footed, right? So we're now in a reactive space, meaning there's initiatives now saying know your rights, understand what can be done, but then what's the recourse, right? How are you actually going to protect yourself against actions taken by National Guard? That's like a military space. You're almost taken out of a jurisdiction if they're arresting you. Now, if they are using manpower and supporting federal agents, then now you're in a federal system, which DC is, but it still has state control over certain, its jail system. Where are you? Then who do you rely on to protect your rights? And then what attorneys can you rely on to help you if you're arrested? That's the way I process it. But, this has been, I believe, on its way ever since that day, and the election day. I couldn't have predicted it to have been so fast and so swift in the way that he's moving. It's not just what's happened to date, but what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate you bringing up Election Day. And you're right. There are a number of people in D.C. that sort of saw this coming, knowing that D.C. has always been vulnerable to the whims of Congress, the whims of any president because of D.C. home rule. Did you expect that the chief of police would, in some people's view, sort of acquiesce, to the will of this president, the will of this administration? Some people shocked how quickly the DC police chief seemed to reverse a policy where now DC police are allowed to coordinate and cooperate with the feds when they encounter undocumented individuals in DC.
So there was litigation that took place. There was an emergency hearing that went on. DC basically said stop, and that took place in federal district court. And they struck a deal before there was actually a hearing on the matter, which should give us a bit of peace. Meaning, if they went through, had a hearing, then there was a ruling, the next thing you know, you're at the Court of Appeals, and after the Court of Appeals, you're before the Supreme Court. Now you're talking about DC statehood in a very serious way and who has power and control. So striking a deal should give us a little bit of should actually create a little bit of relief for us. Now, coordinating efforts between DC police, National Guard, and other immigration enforcement, like such as ICE. Why do it? I think if you're looking at it from the end game scenario, and are you saying, are we complicit here? I think I don't have a great grasp as to what could have been the alternative, what it would have looked like, right? Does it make a more swift action against the district, right? By the administration on other topics. And, you know, I think the first sign was them taking control over a DC street in the Black Lives Matter Plaza, right?
Mhm.
And okay, before we start talking about funding and whatever, we'll just remove the street name. We'll tear up the street. Okay, leave us alone. Okay, well, next is okay, we're sending National Guard out. And I'm not saying that's the true order, but
Yeah.
you're saying, okay, we're going to acquiesce. We're going to come to a deal. We'll do what you ask us to do. So to keep you off of us. Well, now you got to ask what's next.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'll tell you what's next. Just today, President Trump made some more news saying that the administration will seek death penalty in all DC murder cases. Although there are reports that could be difficult in practice, CNN reporting that the president said that his administration will seek the death penalty in all murder cases in DC, a move that could run into significant obstacles with the city juries. How concerned are you about this latest move from the president?
So what I think is interesting is he also affected what we do. We don't have a cash bail system here, meaning he now wants the bail system. He's trying to bring back an old school way of, if you get arrested, you better have some money to get out of jail. Now he's talking about a death penalty. You know, he's having us revert to an old way, and we've been trying to do away with the death penalty. And now you want to bring it back in Washington, D.C. for murder. Look, you know, we've progressed to where we are in order to be a better society. We want to move in a direction that creates a society that people don't need disincentives to behave well, right? We don't want to live in a society that uses death as a disincentive to, behaving a certain way. We want to be so far beyond that. We want to be so cutting edge, and we want to be ahead of it, such that that isn't what we need to have us behave the right way. And so he's exercising and using DC as a testing ground for what may be happening across the country, right? And so when you process that, it's not just going to stop in Washington, D.C. Does he want to go over to Illinois or California, somewhere in Florida, somewhere in New York, and see how leaders in these various areas responded, to see how he then acts with his sweeping, presidential power in other places? That's what I think this is really doing. It's testing our resolve. It's testing our will, and who's willing to put up a fight, and how, and on what issues.
Yeah, I think you're right. And at the top of the show, I mentioned some work that is afoot on the grassroots level in DC. The DC Community Organizing Festival is taking place Saturday, September 6th from 12 to 4 at the University of the District of Columbia. Ryan, you know where I think this thing is headed? I think that this president is looking to mount a challenge to our First Amendment rights to the likes of, that we haven't seen before. I think that this president, this administration, is on a one-way course to challenge our very right to protest. Our very right to protest. I mean, you think about it. Once you have the National Guard in place, once you federalize them, once you've unleashed other federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the DEA, once you have secured the funds through the so-called big, beautiful bill, which so many folks refer to as the big bad nightmare, once you've secured those funds to be able to continue to fund uh, federal law enforcement at record levels. And when you're putting out decrees saying, hey, we're going to bring back the death penalty, and we're going to end cash bail, and this and that, you were setting the stage for a moment where there is a clash with folks on the grassroots level, and you have a lot more law enforcement to take them into custody. You have criminalized just about uh, you know anything that they might do that may get in your way, right? And so, do you have that same sneaking suspicion that this president is setting the stage for mass protests that will turn into mass incarceration and mass deportations? I want to give you a chance to answer that question in full.
Mm-hmm.
When we come forward, we are live in afternoon drive time with attorney and former Associate DC Attorney General Ryan L. Jones. We are getting his temperature check on what is afoot in our nation's capital, his hometown. You'll get his reaction to my question on the other side. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, and he is Ryan L. Jones. He's an attorney and also former Associate Attorney General of our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., his hometown. Ryan, before the break, I was asking you, where are all of these actions, this flurry of actions on the part of the president, on the part of the Trump administration? Where is this leading? My sense is that we are on a one-way track to criminalizing our right to protest, and that by doing that, it may very well lead to more mass incarceration, more mass deportations. But you tell us, what do you think?
So thinking over this earlier today, that didn't come to mind. Free speech didn't come to mind. What did come to mind was DC statehood. And so when you're putting statehood on the agenda, that means does DC get a right to vote in the House with Congress over time, which then would sway, because DC being such a blue district, does sway the power, right? People who are in power don't want to give it up. So they want to make sure that statehood never becomes a topic that's that it's even close to becoming a reality. And I believe we're watching it get thwarted. And so if we start taking these matters to the courts and we start going up the chain, and it does go to the Supreme Court, it may take a very long time before we're able to undo what's done during this Trump era. And that's what really came to mind. We never thought that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned, right? That happened because of what happened with who we put in office and then who they put in power with the Supreme Court. People have been fighting for a long time to have, the right to abortion overturned, right? To get to where we are today. And you got to think with statehood, what's our push? Who is all behind it? What type of cases are we going to have? And so if you can say, hey, we're going to put it on the front line in federal district court, whether or not the president has the right to put in police powers over the jurisdiction, other issues start to get tucked into that. And then how's it interpreted? And so do I think it's the right to protest? I don't think we're going to have that taken away from us. He's not going to be able to strip that out of the Constitution. That's what my thought is. We're going to be able to have the right to collect, the right to public protest. Maybe we get another interpretation of what public space means, right? Maybe. And, but I don't know if that's really at the top of the agenda for them, so much as eliminating the possibility for DC to be a state and then have two members in Congress and in the Senate, which would then change the way we legislate for many years to come.
And who knows? It could be all of the above. It could be all the above. But
right, that's fair enough.
For folks who are less familiar about DC statehood, really, it's that DC Home Rule Act. That's really the only thing that is preventing Trump from a full out takeover of Washington D.C. No.
So home rule, and check my facts here, but the district has the right to govern itself. It came in, we had a mayor. The mayor is essentially like a governor of a state. It's got a city council, which enacts its laws, but those laws then get checked by Congress. It says, DC, you can govern yourself, but you have to come to us for what the law is going to be there, and then how much money you'll get to fund these initiatives. And so that's the short version of what home rule does. It allows us to elect our own officials, write some of our own laws, and then Congress gets to check it. Now, we want to take it a step further. We actually want home rule to be shifted into saying DC has its right to govern itself, and we don't need to go to Congress for approving our budget, for approving our laws. We want to be able to act as a state. We want to be able to deploy our resources. You know, we have a great tax base here. We want to be able to use our own tax dollars for what it is that we want to use it for. And so that's the statehood conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But then that allows us to build buildings, schools, other things needed for this district without having to check in with Congress. I don't think home rule's under attack per se, but it could be. And the interpretation of it in the courts and what we're allowed to do and the executive powers over the district could come out before the courts and play out before the courts. And now we're having to reinterpret or effectively, that's through the Constitution, or reinterpret home rule, and then effectively have Congress go and revisit home rule in and of itself.
So for folks who are less familiar, and I'm so glad that we're talking to a DC native and getting the skinny on this. For folks who are less familiar, when folks talk about DC statehood, they're talking about it because they don't have statehood, right? So here in California, where I'm at today, we are a state. We have, a governor. We have all the rights that are entitled to a state. DC, not so much, right? And so that's why this fight for statehood has been so serious and so necessary. It's also worth noting that when you drive around Washington, D.C., if you ever see a Washington, D.C. license plate,
that's right. Taxation without representation.
That's exactly what it says.
We talk about Eleanor Holmes Norton, a great member, prolific even, has held her position for many years, but she's not a voting member of the House. She's a powerful voice and speaks to the needs of Washington, D.C. residents, but she should have the right to vote in the House on bills, on money.
That's right. And so again, we're taking people to school, because I think that's what we need to do. People need to understand, not just what's happening in Washington, D.C., but why is it happening in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C. has a congressional delegate, not a member of Congress, a delegate, and that is congressional delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, who has served with integrity for a long time, decades. And it's worth noting that she can only vote to pass bills out of committee. She cannot vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. And so the over 700,000 residents that call DC home, they don't really have a voice in Congress, right? Not when it comes to voting on bills on the floor. They don't have a voice in Congress. It's not the same as the voices of members of Congress from California or New York or other parts of the country.
Rhode Island or Montana, places
right,
have a smaller population than DC.
And so, we got a serious problem here. You are a Democrat. Are you frustrated that Democrats, when they did have power in the White House, when they did control the House and the Senate, are you peeved that Democrats didn't do more to advance DC statehood?
Um, not, it's one of those things, right? It is such a purist kind of conversation when you're talking about the Constitution. You look at the Constitution, it says the district should house our federal government. It's going to be this independent, not treated as a state, but it's to house our federal government. So basically, we're asking to create a new state. That's why it would be 51. And in 51, you're saying really what we're doing now would be the 51st state, while the federal government, in and of itself, where everything sits now, will remain this cordoned off part of the district. And there are federal grounds that the district can't control. We just control some of the streets, and there's parkland, and then other things of that nature that we can see a clear line that belongs to the district versus belongs to the federal grounds. Many of the agencies are housed in buildings that are federal property, so it's already there. However, what powers each of these things? So now you're talking about utilities. You're going to say, well, these are DC owned or private owned. Who's going to bear the burden of these costs, so on and so forth? Who then pays? It's those types of particulars that probably have slowed the conversation down. And you're talking about a massive shift in coordination that I think people shied away from. Now, could the Democrats have done it if they really, really wanted to? Should they have? Should they press flesh more on it? I say the answer is yes, because we're watching the other side not care, press the flesh, do it, and now we're reeling in such a way where where's our recourse? Who's going to step up? Who's going to be the wave for the Democrats? Who's going to lead that wave to combat what's happening right now? You said too many people are acquiescing too quickly under this rule, under Trump, this new regime of what it is to be a Republican, right? It's like, who's fighting back? And so when you do step into a seat of power, now you know how you have to wield it, because the other side's not going to be so generous. They're not going to be so forgiving. They're not going to be saying, well, let's balance it out and play the game soft. They're playing the game hard, fast, swift, and without regard for the other principles that guide this government.
Ryan, in our remaining minutes, I want to give you a chance, to talk about where we go from here. There are a lot of troubling headlines that are coming out of Washington. That's nothing new. But what is new is we're seeing our nation's capital occupied by federal law enforcement, by National Guardsmen that have been federalized. We are seeing checkpoints set up across town, and not just in Northwest DC, all around town, all four quadrants of Washington, D.C. We're seeing images and video of our people being detained. Folks just riding the bus, folks just walking down the street, folks just sitting in a park, being detained, being accused of not having the right paperwork, of being undocumented. Talk to us about where we go from here.
So being a guy from Washington, D.C., growing up in the 80s, in the 90s, watching D.C. transition now in the 2000s from being what was once a murder capital of our country to an area where there has a wonderful, bustling business community, thriving real estate value, an incredibly strong tax base. And that's because of, a shift in the population. During the 80s and early 90s, Washington, D.C. had to deal with a proliferation of the crack epidemic. Then with that came other blight. And the shift, and when Marion Barry was elected for maybe a second or third time in the late 90s, there was federal government takeover of our budget. right? And we got our books together. After the books get together, that means the Runnies right now, there's development, and now there's a new wave of people that want to populate the District of Columbia. Now the district is no longer Chocolate City as we once knew it. It's some sort of, latte at this point, right? Which is what some people consider it. Where was the National Guard when we were having the problems in the 80s and 90s? Well, we'd say it was by design that their drugs were placed in certain neighborhoods, that there was a real pressure point to see the depression of a certain people in this city. And we were doing it to ourselves through drug uses, the way we were, the ripping apart of families, how the criminal justice system was putting people away because of the use of drugs and other violence. We never thought it was necessary to bring the National Guard in. Now, DC in a place where violence is at an all-time, well, not an all-time, but violence is on the downturn, right? We haven't seen the safety concerns that we once did. We haven't seen the other issues, but now in a city where it's almost as if there's the safety issues are very concentrated, right? You can identify it very clearly. And so now you bring in this extra muscle where there is a weakened community, and the trouble that's caused isn't that significant. There's a greater concern in the legalized restaurant industry, in the restaurant industry, and the legalized, recreational drug use industry, because those are now businesses that are operating under DC law that are making use of people who may be immigrants or people who are selling a Schedule I substance under a state law, but not federally regulated. So they're more afraid, and they're loud, and they're more concerned than maybe some low-income residents that engage in, low-level crimes and drug, trafficking, or, in the worst-case scenario, it is violence. It is, robbery or murder, right? But those types of crimes aren't the major issues here in Washington, D.C. as they once were. So why now? And it is, to me, a political football that's being wielded, and this is an exercise of power, and it's a sign more than, or it's a performance more than it is a desire to actually, gain results.
Yeah.
The streets are quieter, much quieter. Now, there was a time
when we come forward, I want you to stick with us just a little bit longer. In our remaining minutes, I want to give you a chance to talk to us a little bit about the mood on the streets, and talk about the impact that you're hearing in terms of local businesses. I'm seeing a lot of video and a lot of photos from 14th Street and other main thoroughfares throughout the city. More with former Associate DC Attorney General Ryan L. Jones. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. In our remaining minutes, we're joined with Ryan L. Jones. He's an attorney and former Associate Attorney General of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Ryan, what is the mood in Washington, D.C.? And also, what is the impact that we're starting to see on local businesses and restaurants in the district?
Starting with the later part of your question, I think the fear is there from local businesses, small businesses, restaurants, that it'll put a chill on people wanting to come outside, have a good time while being out, for fear or concern that this National Guard could, create some unpleasantries while being out and about in the city. I think also talking with some older residents, those who have had a feeling about, this president, they're irate. They are watching the news like everyone else, and then concerned about where they travel around the city. That's getting into a vehicle, being worried about being pulled over or stopped more than they would under normal conditions. Then it's, well, what do you want to do? What fight do you want to put up? And if you believe the other rhetoric, which is this is a race-based situation and it's being masked, and that, being black is creates you being a target. There is that fear. And so you hear that tone
Yeah.
across conversations, no matter whether we're talking about just residents or in the business community.
Ryan, in about 30 seconds, I've got to ask you this question. You know, the chill is in the air. There are a lot of people that are not sure how this thing's going to go, but it's no doubt that we need more public servants out there. You have run for Attorney General of DC before. Inquiring minds want to know, would you consider running for DC Attorney General again or some other public office? Are you willing to serve?
I'll say I am absolutely willing to serve. And over the last month, I've had a lot of conversations about the potential for running and being impactful. And not just running, but being able to use my voice as an attorney to provide some people a sense of comfort and letting them know what their rights are and that they have soldiers and warriors in their corner up against this administration. And we will take it to the court. We'll take it to the mat. Now, I'm not proclaiming that I'm going to jump out there and get into into a race, but let's see what happens. I think the people are a fan of Brian Schwab. He embraced me and brought me into his administration, and I would respect that. And so, if he would say, "Ryan, I want to pass the baton to you," I would honorably step to the plate. I would not run against him unless there is just such an outcry and something falls through during his administration where that becomes an issue. But I don't see that happening. I support his work, and I would like to be a good steward of the Democratic Party and follow the leadership and do what's necessary and perform where asked.
Our thanks to former Associate DC Attorney General Ryan L. Jones, making a little bit of news here today, saying that he would consider running for public office again. And if the current DC Attorney General passed the baton, he would gladly take it and run with it. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Ryan for joining us. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA